think most of you know me. I'm Leonard Lehrman. There's much to say, and that will be said, about this remarkable woman, my mother, who came from Russia at age 12, knowing no English, and who became the greatest editor any of us who knew her has ever known. Very much. She was an incredible teacher, and would have had a career teaching had it not been for the McCarthyist loyalty oaths demanded of the profession. Instead, she became a librarian at several colleges, most recently at LIU Post, where she served for 28 years. She was also a first-rate translator for the founder of the Moscow Jewish Theater, Solomon Mikhoels, throughout New England, on behalf of Russian war relief in 1943. There's a clipping here about how she got an award for that. She also translated the novella, A Week Like Any Other Week, for Massachusetts Review. And with me have poems and libretti by Yevtushenko, Blok, Khlebnikov, Mayakovsky, Fiat, Krylov, Derzhavin, which Helene, my wife, will sing at her memorial on Sunday. And of course her beloved Alexander Pushkin. My father used to say that if we ever divorced him, that Pushkin was going to be the correspondent, because he died in 1837. So she was not a poet or a musician, but she had such a love and appreciation for words and music that with a collaborator, as my father was with her on her book, Folk Tales of the Amur, she was capable of doing and did so much. The translations that she wrote with me of the first Russian opera, A Blink is the Life of the Tsar, that translation was premiered by the Bel Canto Opera Company in 1979. We were so hoping she would live to hear the translation we wrote of Dargamishky's and Pushkin's Rusalka. And my wife's son, Benjamin, who is here today, did perform the opening aria from that opera on our Russian Music Festival, previewed here at the Amsterdam 2 years ago. We know how much he and that meant to her. And by his presence here today, we know how much she meant to him. May her memory be not only a blessing, but a continuing inspiration. Now I have some excerpts from her memoirs that I was up till 4 reading last night. And there's much too much, but I think I'd like to read some of it. And maybe you'll see what you think.
Louder.
My mother was born.
People are asking
Louder.
Louder.
I'm sorry, thank you. I will, I promise. My mother was born in Samara, in the Soviet Union, on March 1st, 1923, to the smell of Hamantaschen, because it was poor. She writes, I remember my mother's dressing table. I would always attempt to arrange things on it in some kind of symmetrical order. Yes, even at that age, I liked order and symmetry. In July 1931, my father got sick with pneumonia. This was before antibiotics. At the end of the week, July 26, 1931, my father died. He was 45. I'm named after him. When we arrived at the hospital, the coffin was placed on a horse-drawn wagon. I was put on the wagon next to it. My mother walked behind the wagon alone. Behind her were many, many people, all the people who worked with my father. There was also a brass band that played the funeral march. We're sorry, Mom, we don't have a brass band. We have many, many people. I saw my first operas and ballets at the famous Kirov Theater. At the time it was still called the Mariinsky, and now it is again. The first opera I saw was the Tale of Tsar Sultan by Rimsky-Korsakov, after a fairy tale by Pushkin. As far as I know, it has never been performed in this country, to my regret. I think that's true, is it not? I don't believe there has been an American production. There were many cultural activities going on in school, and it was we, the students, who made them happen. An assembly was held for every conceivable holiday, and the students were encouraged to present whatever form of entertainment they could put together. There was always singing, some folk dancing. All Russian children know Russian folk dance. Someone would play the piano, someone would recite poetry. That would usually be my part. And there would be some kind of skit or play. I always had the lead. My children acquitted their my children acquired their love of acting honestly. Sometime in the 3rd grade, I joined the Young Pioneers. This was an organization somewhat similar to the American Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts. And our meetings were held at school, and sometimes we would go as a group to visit the pioneers at another school or attend a joint meeting at the Central Clubhouse. We always marched to these meetings. We always sang as we marched. At the head of the column, one of us carried a Soviet flag. Behind the flag bearer came the drummer. Sometimes I was the one who carried the flag. And once, when our regular drummer was absent, I was the drummer. I must say I did a good job, and why not? I always had a good sense of rhythm. I visited the Soviet Union again in 1968, 1970, and 1987 with Dad. Great changes were continuing to be made in the country. My last visit was at the beginning of Perestroika, and there was then so much hope, such strong belief that things were going to be better. But I think if I went back now, I would not recognize the country of my childhood. Well, it seems communism didn't work in Russia. Judging by what's been going on in the last few years, capitalism does not work there either. So what is the answer? Still, I do not regret that I was born there. I had a very rich childhood. I think my life is richer now from my being the product of 2 cultures. I still love Russian music, Russian literature, Russian folk songs and dances, and I still think Leningrad is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. We left on August 12, 1935. My friend's reaction was, "You are going to a capitalist country?" There was a similar reaction on the part of a friend I made in this country after I had been here a while. "You live in a communist country?" How did I feel about leaving? I didn't like it at all. I was happy where I was. I was one of 2 top students in my class. I was elected homeroom president. Whenever we had any dramatic plays or presentations at school, as she said before, I always had a lead. My brother got tickets at his school for adult performances such as Carmen or The Barber of Seville. My first ballet was The Little Humpbacked Horse, a fairy tale by Yersho. When I came to this country, my mother's brothers were amazed that we had been to opera. My mother said to me, "Did they think we lived in a barbaric country?" My cousins knew nothing of opera. Here, one of my favorite places for recreation in Leningrad was the Park of Culture and Rest, where something was always going on, a magic show, a puppet show, or a concert. The favorite of the brass band seemed to be March of the Toreadors from Carmen. The favorite baritone aria would be Figaro's aria, sung to Cherubino in The Marriage of Figaro. The favorite soprano aria would be from an unfinished opera of Beethoven. I think that must be A Perfido. I can't think what else she could be talking about.
Right.
I liked these arias so much and heard them so often, I memorized all the words, in Russian, of course. All opera is sung there in Russian. That's true of other European countries as well. For example, in Germany, all opera was then sung in German. I wonder if opera would attract larger audiences in the United States if it were always given in English. Hello, Bronx Opera. Perhaps the super titles now used here will do the trick. Whenever I met anyone the first thing that person would ask was, "How do you like America?" Well, the truth is, I didn't, for several reasons. I did not like what to me appeared a lack of purpose. Before I came here, I read in Maxim Gorky, a Soviet writer, words which in part shaped my philosophy. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what am I for? It was not until many, many years later that I found out this was a quotation from Hillel, translated somewhat differently into Russian. The English translation of the second part seems to read, "What am I?" Well, what were all these Americans that I met for? There did not seem to be a purpose, a general goal, a concern for the welfare of society, as opposed to a concern for themselves alone. There did not seem to be what we would call today a social consciousness. Another thing that bothered me was a kind of pervasive anti-intellectualism. Who were the individuals best known to my contemporaries? Movie stars. There was no one I could discuss my favorite books with or even what was going on in the world. Knowledge for its own sake didn't seem to be on the agenda. And she didn't write this, but I remember that she used to say, there were 2 things that I wanted most. I wanted to have a family, and I wanted to change the world. And my family turned out well. I wish the world had. Thank you.